Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of So Random and Weird. I'm today's host, Sheena, and I don't know, we're in that liminal space between actual fall and summer, and I choose fall. Mm, hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just been really hot and muggy. It's like it wants to rain, but by the time it gets over here, it's like dissipated. So it's just like the clouds gave up. So you step outside and it just feels like I am just covered in water and sweat, and it's not pleasant. So I just, nope. And then in a couple of days or so, you've got school starting for you. So yeah. Well, other than that, I guess we'll get started with the episode. So my topic was history, and kind of piggybacking off of what you did last week, it reminded me that I had brought up this topic before. I thought it would be pretty fun that I go over the when the church put animals on trial. Yes. Yes, you heard me correct. Animals. Kind of. Kind of. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, kind of. So in 1522, there is a plague of rats tearing through the barley crop in Autun, France, and the town does what many reasonable medieval towns would do. They take the rats to court, not pest control, court, with a judge, a docket, and defense attorney. A defense attorney for rats, and a good one. And I'll get into all the technicalities about that here soon. So I am going in six cases about genuinely unhinged medieval and early modern practices of putting animals on trial. Pigs, rats, a rooster accused of witchcraft for laying an egg, cats condemned as agents of Satan. And so I've got a full docket, and so let's get into it. So, before we get into those cases, I'm going to lay out a framework because this is the part that, like, quick internet listicles will skip and actually explains why the punishments look so different from case to case. There were two completely separate systems putting animals on trials in medieval and early modern Europe. And they ran on two different kinds of logic. You had your secular courts handling domestic animals, pigs, cows, horses, dogs, sheep, for specific violent acts, almost always killing or injuring a person. These were run like human murder trials. A judge, witness, sometimes a defense attorney, formal verdict, and a public execution, usually a hanging. And then you have your ecclesiastical courts, church courts, handled what medieval law called vermin: rats, mice, locusts, weevils, caterpillars, eels, and ants. Anything considered wild rather than domesticated fell into this category. So, mhm, yes, you heard me right. So, um, since you obviously can't hang a swarm of locusts, the church's tool of choice was excommunication or formal anathema, which is cursing the creatures out of the community of God, sometimes preceded by actual legal proceedings with appointed defense counsel. So, why did anyone think that this was legitimate? A few things. First, the theological worldview. If animals are part of a divinely ordered creation, they are not exempt from divine law. They can transgress it, and the church has the authority to respond, whether that's punishment or, in more forgiving cases, exorcism to drive out whatever evil influence caused the behavior. Second, restoring social and cosmic order. A child's violent death or a wiped out harvest that threatens a famine isn't just tragedy in this worldview, it's a rupture in the moral fabric of the community. A formal trial and public punishment restores the order in a way that quietly killing the pig never could. The spectacle is the point. And third, this is the one that I find the most interesting. Legal formalism has its own value. Medieval legal culture loved procedure. Assigning an animal a defense attorney wasn't necessarily about anyone believing the pig had rights. It was about the court's own legitimacy, depending on the due process being followed. No matter who's on the dock, skip the steps and you've undermined the whole system, which also was for humans as well. Now, historian Sven Gins, who has written specifically about pig trials, frames it as a form of human exceptionalism dressed up as fairness to animals. The trial format lets humans perform their own moral seriousness as much as judges the pig. So, all right, that's the framework that we're going to be handling with. And let's get started with the case that basically every source in this topic opens with because the paperwork survived. January 9th, 1386. So, way, way back when. We're going to Felice, Normandy. A sow gets into a house and fatally mauls an infant, the 3-month-old baby of a man named Jonathan Lamacon. The town doesn't just kill the pig, they try her, formally. And here's the wild part. There's an actual surviving executioner's expense receipt because medieval bureaucracy was petty enough to itemize this. It describes for dragging and hanging roughly 3-year-old sow who had eaten the face of a 3-month-old infant, causing his death, plus 10 sous for a brand new glove for the hangman. So sow, a pig, a female pig. So, and also they expensed a glove for the hangman. They got him a glove. Well, the execution itself followed an eye for an eye logic. Multiple historical accounts describe the pig being maimed and mutilated with a knife in the same way she had injured the child, before being hanged in the town square, dressed in men's clothing. Hmm. Hmm. Yep. So some sources go further and say that she was dressed in a full outfit, waistcoat, gloves, drawers, drawers, and a human mask. Who knows? So before I get into that, just a reminder that the local government footed the bill for the whole production. So why dress the pig? Because the entire spectacle only works if she's treated as if she is a legally and morally responsible person. And per multiple accounts, local farmers reportedly brought their own pigs to the execution, a field trip, essentially, to watch the hanging as a deterrent for their own livestock. That is not what I had pictured for Babe. Yeah. Yeah. Right. But, and this wasn't an isolated incident either. Pigs roamed much more freely in medieval villages than we pictured them today. And they were bigger and closer to the wild boar in temperament, genuinely dangerous around small children who were often left minding themselves or each other in yards and lanes. A very similar case is recorded in 1379 in Saint Marcel le Jussy. I don't know. I know I took some French in college, but I try. Okay. So, a similar case happened where a group of pigs killed a swineherd's child. Felice just happened to be the one where the documentation survived intact. So, we're going to go to 1457, and it's another sow and her piglets as well. So, now this one is different because the medieval courts actually drew careful legal distinctions, which is not what you would have expected. So, December 1457, Savagny in Burgundy, a sow and her six piglets were arrested for the death of a 5-year-old boy named Johann Martin. The piglets were found at the scene covered in blood. The pig's owner, a man named Johann Bailey, Bailly, Bailey. So the owner gets dragged into custody right alongside them. A month later, there is a full trial. Court records show that 3 lawyers present, 2 for the prosecution and 1 for the defense of the pigs. 9 named witnesses testify, plus several more whose names weren't recorded. The judge's conclusion: Bailey should have supervised his animals more carefully, but responsibility for the boy's death lay with the pigs themselves, and specifically with the sow, as in effect the ringleader. After consulting local experts in customary law, the judge sentenced her to death, hanged by her hind legs from a tree per the specific method laid out in the ruling. Here's the part that's weird. The six piglets were acquitted, and the reasoning was that um, that they put on there in the trial documents and was later summarized by the 19th century writer Robert Chambers was that the piglets, on the account of their youth, the bad examples set by their mother, and the lack of direct proof that they'd actually participated in harming the child. So let me just reiterate, a medieval court in 1457 formally ruled that baby pigs shouldn't be held criminally responsible because of their age and their mother's bad influence. That's a mitigating circumstance argument that would not sound out of place in a modern juvenile court. It tells you that these trials weren't universally just mob spectacle. Some of them were run with genuine legal nuance, even when the defendants were livestock. So now we're going to go back a couple of years to 1474, and this is in Basel, Switzerland. A rooster reportedly lays an egg. Biologically, obviously impossible, but that's exactly the problem. Medieval and early modern folklore held that an egg laid by a rooster, if incubated, would hatch into a cockatrice or basilisk, a monstrous serpent capable of killing with a glance. So an impossible egg wasn't a curiosity. It was read as a physical evidence that the rooster was in league with the devil, deliberately producing something demonic. The city puts the rooster on trial for witchcraft. After what's described as a thorough investigation and formal proceedings, the court found the rooster guilty and sentenced it to death by burning at the stake, with the egg itself burned alongside it, presumably to make sure that nothing demonic could hatch from the evidence. So, with this one, as you can see, is a clean example of how these trials worked as omen management. Nobody could explain the egg biologically at the time, so community needed a story that restored a sense of control and put the offending creatures on trial and destroy the evidence was that story. It's the same instinct behind a lot of witch trial logic a century or two later. An unexplainable, frightening event that demands legally sanctioned villain, even when the villain is a chicken, which, in my belief, chickens are the villain, and I will gladly keep eating them. So then, next, we have a case that is in 1484, and this one inverts the usual dynamic, and I didn't see it covered nearly as often. So now we are, if you hadn't noticed, all of these are in the French region. So this, we are dealing with a lot of Catholic influence. So we are in Bisson, France. The city is in the middle of a serious rat infestation, broader civic crisis. Instead of the rats going on trial, which, given everything that we've covered, would be the expected move, the city's cats who get condemned. The cats were formally declared agents of Satan and systematically executed across the city. Think about the layered irony here. Cats are the natural predator that should have been controlling the rat population. Instead, the panic and superstition of the movement turns on the cats as the demonic element, likely tangled up with the broader medieval associations uh, between cats, especially black cats, and witchcraft. Killing off your rat control population during an active rat crisis is, with the benefit of hindsight, catastrophically counterproductive. Yeah. Yeah, there's your problem. Let's take care of the ones that are actually taking care of the problem, or at least attempting to. Yeah. But here's the other thing though too, is that these cats as well are being affected by whatever they're bringing. So not much does. So, and then also here, some historians have posted or have pointed to exactly this kind of civic catcalling repeatedly across various towns in this period as a contributing factor to how badly rat borne disease could spread when it showed up. It's a good reminder that these trials weren't a neutral scientific process misapplied. They were superstition and scapegoating with a legal costume on. And sometimes the scapegoat was exactly backwards from what would have actually helped. So now I'm going to go into the rats of Aton, which is 1522, which is the one that I mentioned at the beginning. And didn't you have Aton as well for your werewolf trials last week? Autun? Aton? Autun? Wasn't that? It's a city in France, Aton, Autun. Yeah. Yeah. So here we are in Aton, Burgundy, which is France as well, 1522. Rats have devastated the barley harvest, and in a subsistence agricultural economy, that's not a quirky inconvenience. Excuse me. It's a genuine famine risk. The town brings the rats before the ecclesiastical court, and the bishop appoints a young lawyer named Bartholomew Chazanny, sometimes spelled Bartholomew with M-Y de Chasseneuth, which is Chasseneuz, to defend them. So, however, it's okay. I'm just looking up, it's looking up, double checking. Uh, oh, no, never mind. No, it wasn't a ton. I could have swore you said a ton, but it wasn't a ton. So I just double checked. It was not where the werewolf trials were in France. So, all right. So, how do you serve rats with a legal summons? You don't, obviously. And that's exactly Shaughnessy's opening move. When the rats predictably fail to appear at their first court date, he argues the summons wasn't valid because it only named the rats local to a ton, when the actual accused population was scattered across the entire diocese, meaning a single local summons couldn't possibly have reached the defendant. So basically saying they're all over the place, just here isn't going to work. So the court agrees. They order the summons to be read aloud from every pulpit in every parish to make sure all the rats are properly notified. Squeak, 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 squeaky, squeak, squeak. But of course, they still don't show up. So Shaughnessy, it's okay. So, Shaughnessy's second move, he argues that no defendant should be legally compelled to risk their life just to appear in court, and that his clients would have to cross territory full of cats and dogs, and the town's residents refused to keep their cats indoors to guarantee his clients safe passage to the courthouse. I mean, these are excellent, excellent reasons. I would hire him as my attorney. Yeah. So For this, he's arguing witness intimidation via house cats and dogs. And it works. The case drags on through what several accounts describe as a genuinely lengthy legal battle. It eventually just falls apart with no verdict rendered. The rats walk. Shaughnessy goes on to a legitimately distinguished legal career representing actual human clients. Yeah. So quick. Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, like you said, they didn't have TV and a lot of them couldn't read. So, no, no, don't know. So, quick honesty break. Yeah. Because this is important, historians actually debate how much of this happened exactly as described. The story comes down to us mostly through 19th and 20th century retelling, citing earlier legal writers, while Shaughnessy himself was absolutely a real prominent French jurist who wrote seriously on the topic of prosecuting animals. Some scholars think the specific rat trial narrative has been embellished or compressed over centuries of retelling. So, great story, real person, contested details, which frankly describes about half of what we cover in the show, anyways, when it comes to history. Also, worth noting, some records place a very similar Chenesnay rat defense case at a ton closer to 1487, with slightly different details about the continuance he won. The core through line, though, he successfully delayed rat prosecutions by arguing about safe travel, shows up across multiple retellings, even when the exact year and details shift. So I'm going to pull out a few more here, and we're just going to move quickly through them. So in Stavilio, Italy, 1519, the town formally summoned a group of mice to court for ravaging local crops. Per surviving accounts, the mice were given a legal defense that pleaded for leniency on the basis they were simply struggling to survive, like any creature, not malicious, just hungry. I'll flag this one, that this one comes from thinner sources than the Automne or Savigny, so take the specifics with some caution, but the pattern fits the broader ecclesiastical vermin trial template that we've already established. Your weevil and caterpillar excommunication. Well, don't forget the caterpillars or moths. That is not for me. So, across parts of France, Switzerland, and Italy, insect infestations threatened vineyards and crops were met with formal excommunication proceedings, church officials cursing the offending insects out of the Christian community, sometimes appointed defense counsel arguing on the insects' behalf, mirroring the autumn format almost exactly. These cases treated the insect population collectively as a single defendant class rather than trying to identify the individual offenders, which honestly is more procedurally sensible than putting one specific weevil on the dock. Yeah, yeah. Well, according to the Roman Catholic Church in the 1500s, everybody was Catholic. until Martin Luther. So, or they were Jewish, or they were Islamic. So, because you didn't hear too much about your Buddhists and Taoists and everything like that way into like China. So, you know what? It was just safe to just group them all together and say, all of you out. Yeah. 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 No, no. I mean, these are people who are trying to figure it out some way or another, put their beliefs into who, yeah, especially the ecclesiastical courts, they're putting their beliefs into their God to go, hey, we need help. So we're sending we're excommunicating them from us. Do with what you will with them. Send them to hell, which is basically me every summer. Please send all the bugs to hell, please. So, anyways, some survival legal records describe entire herds of pigs or rat populations formerly ordered to leave a village under the threat of further legal action. Essentially, an eviction notice served on an animal population as if they were capable of receiving and complying with it. So here's your eviction notice. Out. Oink oink. Snort snort. You know what? I don't know. So yeah, yeah, it is. And so the through line across all of these, once a community accepts that the destructive animal population can be a legitimate legal defendant, the court defaults to their normal toolkit: summons, defense counsels, continuances, formal sentencing. Even when applying that took to rodents and insects requires some genuinely creative procedural workarounds. So, a quick note on the tail end of this history, because it's not like animal trials just vanished overnight after the medieval period. The practice persisted in isolated and increasingly rare forms into the 18th and even 19th centuries in parts of Europe. And there are documented cases as late as the early 20th century in some regions, including the Americas. But it declined steadily as the Enlightenment era legal and scientific thinking took hold. The idea that criminal responsibility requires intent, and that intent requires a rational mind capable of understanding right from wrong, cut directly against the theological premise that animals could sin and be morally accountable. The scholar most responsible for cataloging all of this is, for the English language readers, is E.P. Evans, an American academic who published The Criminal Prosecution and Capital Punishment of Animals in 1906, who documented hundreds of cases across roughly 8 centuries. Almost every modern retelling of these trials, including a good chunk of what I've told you today, traces back through Evans' research, which means his 1906 interpretive choices have shaped the popular version of this history for over a century, which is worth keeping in mind next time you see one of these cases repeated as flat, uncomplicated fact. So, ranking time, because I can't do a full episode without picking favorites. The most unhinged specific detail is the hangman's glove line item from Felice. The specificity of the medieval bureaucracy to a glove. A glove. The hangman needed a glove, and the government covered it. That's The most quietly fascinating for me is the Savigny piglets. The 15th century court drawing a mitigating circumstance distinction based on their age and bad parent influence is not primitive cartoonist justice system, and it's been around for a long time. The big picture takeaway that I keep coming back to is that these trials aren't really a story about how animals were treated. They were a story about what a community does with a legal and moral system when something genuinely terrifying and unexplainable happens. A child dies, a harvest fails, an impossible egg appears, and there's no other framework available to make sense of it. The animal in the dock is almost incidental. The trial is for the humans. So, yeah. So that would be the end of my little TED Talk today. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Hmm. Nobody knows. But yeah, it's shocking. And also thinking though today we have a 21st century thought process, unless you ask our president, who probably thinks we should just put all of the animals on trial. Um but yeah, yeah, it's just yeah, sure. Yeah. So I spun the right, right. And so I spun the wheel and I got free space. I know it's happened to me twice now. So I am super excited. Yay! So, and you've got paranormal next week. You have any idea what you're going to be doing? You're going to keep quiet on it? Yep. Well, September, basically when pumpkin spice comes out, it's spooky season. So you're going to get more spooky and from us, and we're going to definitely, yeah. So just be prepared that we're going to be like way, way, way more spooky than normal. And then it will knock your socks off in October with extremely spooky spookiness. And so with that, I've Sarah's next week. Well, it looks like we lost Sarah today. So um, we will see you guys next week. Please like, rate, and review us. Share us with your friends. We can find us on anywhere you get your podcasts. Send us your scary stories so that way we can do something for our Halloween special, and which is at so random and weird pod at gmail.com. And just remember, stay curious, stay weird, and next time your cat does something weird, don't put them on trial.